Do you guys think that Apple Music will take over the streaming industry in a few years, maybe as soon as next year? There's a lot of foreshadowing that says this could be so. Here's an article where an analyst suggests Apple Music is gaining subscribers at 3 times the speed of Spotify. Music is deeply embedded in Apple's DNA. It's something they pour their hearts into. Makes you wonder why Apple didn't join the music streaming industry sooner, right? Well, ever heard of "don't bite the apple that feeds you"? Something similar might have happened here. See, in 2003, I believe it was Jimmy Iovine who approached Steve Jobs and said he wanted to make an iTunes streaming service. This was like a very new concept. I mean, it was very, very new. I don't even believe Netflix was around at the time. And Steve Jobs said it was a great idea. But not yet, he said. And that's because at the time, iTunes was just completely blowing up in sales. And they were making a ton of money for the first time in a long time, they being Apple. They felt, at least in my opinion, that it was too early to compete against their own service. It's kind of like Netflix making a Netflix 2. I don't think they'd want to do that because Netflix is so profitable today. So Steve Jobs and Jimmy Iovine obviously thought it was a good idea, and they withheld the idea for years. And then Spotify comes along, and Apple actually promotes them. Their front page on the App Store and getting a lot of love from Apple, and Apple's trying to push it out to a lot of users. Problem is, years later, Spotify starts beefing with Apple. They're complaining about the share that Apple gets. They want to be treated better than every other app creator. Apple doesn't like this, and next thing you know, boom, Apple Music comes out. This story is eerily similar to Uber and companies like Google and Samsung who have betrayed Apple, and then Apple responds. History shows us that Apple partners with you until you step on their toes, and then they run over yours. I mean, Apple Music patents existed for over a decade. So, did Spotify bite that apple? Apple is making smart moves when it comes to expanding Apple Music. Lately, they partnered with Genius. For some reason, they did not acquire them, which is odd. Genius is my favorite lyric app, and this is a really smart move here. Now you'll get the social integration of Genius and Apple Music working in harmony. You'll get accurate lyrics, and hopefully more annotations. Genius is really ahead of the curve when it comes to lyrics. Most websites just provide lyrics. Genius actually provides explanations of your favorite lyrics, and it's been very helpful for me. You could also edit it like Wikipedia style, and it's very nice. They also have these artist series with actual artists explaining their music and the meaning behind their lyrics. Also, just a few minutes ago, it was confirmed that Apple bought music analytics company Asahi. This is just another push to make Apple Music even more relevant than it already is and compete even more with the likes of Spotify. This is akin to how Apple bought Shazam not that long ago, which, in my opinion, was one of the smartest acquisitions from Apple in the past decade. Shazam has a ton of users and people listening, just like Genius does. I expect these services, Shazam, Genius, Asahi, to fuse with Apple Music, along with HomePod, iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, Apple Watch, Beats, AirPods, everything else Apple. With all that said, let's look at today's numbers. They're estimates, but they're pretty damn close. Some are official from Apple. It seems like they're really gaining on Spotify. This last statistic is from May, and it's 50 users. Looking at the trends, they could well be at 90 by the end of the holiday quarter. I'd say by the end of 2018, because new iPhones are going to be in new hands. HomePod and other services are all fusing together with Apple Music. I would say Apple Music numbers will be 90 million and Spotify will probably be about 105, 110. Not far ahead. When Spotify is attacking their own artists, it doesn't seem like a good business decision. A lot of artists are very unhappy with Spotify, and funnily enough, they're happy with Apple. It's almost like all the stars are aligning for Apple Music. A lot of artists want their radio show on Beats Radio, and a lot of artists hate to have their own music on Spotify, mainly because they're not getting paid, and Spotify is involved in many copyright infringement lawsuits. They reportedly owe artists a lot of money. In the case of Nicki Minaj, apparently they were pissed off because she showed off her music on her own radio show on Beats Radio, which is of course on Apple Music. They responded by pulling the record away from viewers' eyes. It was still there, they just weren't promoting it. This pissed her off, and she tweeted, "My label didn't want to defend me for fear of Spotify trying to teach Ariana a lesson too." I guess her label was afraid. they would also pull Ariana's record from people's eyes. Some may argue that Spotify is way ahead of Apple and that Apple will fail, the usual. But the problem is, what they don't mention and what they don't know is that Spotify has never made profit. They're a profit-losing company, where Apple is a profit-gaining company. Apple Music makes more money in one day than Spotify has ever made. Are you wondering why Spotify is losing money every year, but is still in business? They get money from investors who bet that Spotify will make profit in the future. But with Spotify losing $1 billion a year, while Apple makes about $20 billion a quarter, it doesn't look good for Spotify. Considering Apple's product and growing software integration, where do you think Apple Music will be in the future?